for joining us. I'm really excited today because we're going to talk about achieving success on a global scale. We have some fantastic people on this panel today. Very interesting subject, very relevant for a lot of folks. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I think we'll start off with some introductions. Ken, I'll have you start.
Thank you so much, Finesse, and thank you all of us joining on this panel today. My name's Ken Finneran. I am the CHRO at eMed, a mid-sized digital health provider specializing in managed GLP-1 GIP programs on behalf of enterprises and moving into the direct-to-consumer space in that same space as well. Thank you. Happy to be here today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Very interesting space to be in right now. David.
Thank you, Finesse. My name is Dave Harrison. I'm based in New York. I'm a global HR partner for the go-to-market organization for a company called SimilarWeb. We're a data provider in the ad tech space, and I'm pleased to be here. Thanks.
Lovely. And actually, where do you live? I want to know where we're all at in the universe.
I'm based in Miami, Florida, but have lived all over the world. Spent 15 years in Europe in multiple countries, Austria, Germany, Poland, and the UK during that time.
Fascinating. I'm glad I asked. Dave, what about you?
I'm currently living in New York. Similar to Ken, I lived about 20 years overseas, mostly all in Asia, between mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. Came back to the US about 4.5 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay. Raul, you're next.
Thank you, Finesse. And hi, everybody. I'm Raul Monroig. I'm the HR Vice President for Bristol-Myers Squibb Intercontinental Region, which basically is everything outside the US and Europe. I'm, as you can probably notice, not US born. I'm Spanish, lived in the UK, Austria, obviously Spain, Italy, and now the US since 3 years ago.
Okay, this is really hard to lead because I have not left the United States. I've lived in the US my whole life, but this is inspiring, especially the subject we're going to talk about because there's it's a different perspective for sure. So I'm Finesse Blumenthal. I'm the global head of HR for Secretariat Advisors. We're a litigation consulting firm based out of Atlanta, but we are in 10 countries, well distributed. And for people that really don't understand our industry, we have some of the top expert witnesses in the world in different practice lines. It's fascinating work and incredible people. So yeah. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've lived in New York and Los Angeles, but I'm in Atlanta, and I hope maybe to retire someday in some exciting place in the country, but this is where I am now. Okay, very cool. Well, let's kick it off. I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Given the tremendous variance in the regulatory structures, standards of living, and cultural expectations across borders, what best practices can global organizations adopt to ensure that HR is sufficiently responsive and effective at scale? Whew, that's a big one. I will kick it off with you, Raul.
Thank you, Finesse, and really interesting question. We could talk for hours, but we don't have those, so I'm going to try and put my thoughts in like a 3-bullet point sort of format. I think first and foremost, there needs to be a clear intention and strategy behind it, right? Because for many companies that call themselves global means sometimes not truly global. It means US and sometimes Europe, or the combination of both. And being truly global it's a difficult feat to achieve because you have to be willing to win, and for that you have to be willing to adapt and flex. And that applies to HR as much, in my experience, as it applies to the business as a whole. So what it means for me in practical terms is, one, we need to create an HR workforce or a talent in HR that truly understands and is global. And again, that takes time and intention. And I think you need to create the practices that are capable of truly being global from a comp and ben point of view, from a talent development, from all sides and intents and purposes, right? And then last but not least, I think you gotta be intentional about creating the flexibility in your HR workforce to be able to win in the talent market of those countries. What I mean by that specifically is that you need to be able to put as HR business partners, as HR leaders, as HR vice presidents, as CHROs, people who understand the different dynamics, and they're very different, as many of in this group will attest, the different dynamics of the other countries in the world, where for many companies like ours, we're US based, we're European based, and the rest of the world is the rest of the world, right? And so how to adapt to those, and how do we put the right people in those places who can, one, understand, and two, lead the development of different practices in HR to be truly global. That really takes a skill and the intention. I hope I'm clear enough.
Yes, no, you are, except that I want to hear more, because I mean, what you do specifically, that's a big lift. How many countries do you support?
Currently, I do 52 markets
Yeah.
with 15 subsidiaries and distributors. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even just with 10 countries, it's very complex. The key is balancing that consistency with local flexibility, right? I would
Yeah.
love to know how you're doing that. No, again, we only have an hour here, but maybe some high level, things that really have made an impact for the people in the organization.
Yeah. So I think it all starts, and I'm not going to be surprising here, it all starts with the business, right? The idea is, what is the business plan and how do we adapt to that? And how do we build the organization that delivers that business? And then, of course, you don't do it alone. You, as an HR business partner, you have the COEs, you have the HR services or people services or whatever way you want to call it. And our task is to make sure that it all lines up so that we are able to respond. Let me give you an example. Growing in China demands a different set of organizational development practices than winning in the US or winning in Germany, right? Culturally speaking, the Chinese culture is a very different one, as Ken and David surely attest. And in creating an organization and developing the right leaders for that particular market is a very different task than even Australia in the same sort of physical area, right? And so being able to, one, understand what are those specific needs, and two, put the plans in action to develop the leadership and the talent that you need, and to gather and frankly attract that talent to your company is a different exercise. On a basic level, it's the same thing. It's still talent attraction, it's still talent development, but on a practical day-to-day level, you got to do very different things. And that sensitivity from both the local HR people, the regional, and then the global, and being the conduit to these are different sensitivities that you need to adapt to, but at the same time, how do we bring the global practices into the local market? That is a game that we need to play, and you need to have the right talent.
It's a great way to end, because really, I mean, at the end of the day, that's that's the most important part, is having the right talent, right? Okay, does anybody want to add?
If I can maybe piggyback on a couple of the things that he mentioned there, I love the fact or the item that he brought up around having the right talent within the HR team. And these are folks who not only understand international business, but true global enterprises. It is different than just someone whose experience has perhaps only been in the US. And one example I can give is, as we were setting up, not here at eMed, but in another organization that I worked for, regional shared service centers in the various regions, whether that be APAC, Europe, EMEA, or the Americas. In doing so, you had people who were very used to currency fluctuation. Those who have grown up typically here in the US we talk right now about inflation, but most of us have never experienced hyperinflation here in the US. So if you're looking at things like transfer pricing, looking at hedging, looking at other ideas, unless you've experienced that and staff appropriately with individuals who understand that capability, you're doing your organization a disfavor, as good as they may be in understanding their local markets. So that global capability, couldn't agree more, Raul. That is a huge element. The only thing I would maybe add to, which I think is implied, but it takes effort and therefore training on cross-cultural competencies and cultural intelligence. As much as we think about empathy, emotional intelligence, and smarts, if you will, IQ, EQ, there's that CQ of cultural intelligence that cannot be underestimated. And as more and more people are traveling or getting set up in shared service centers, et cetera, that education on true cultural competence cannot be understated.
Oh my gosh. Are you doing that currently? Cultural training?
We are,
Yeah.
and we leverage some of the best works. We talk about do assessments. We talk about even the way that individuals speak and understand, whether it's more passive, active, aggressive, however that may be. And sometimes it leads to laughter. Sometimes it leads to the oh my gosh effect in the room. Sometimes it's a combination of that. But it is very eye-opening for the teams as they start interacting, even with understanding how emails are worded, how direct someone is versus indirect. These are all things that once you start talking about them openly, leads not only to better communication, but better collaboration and long-term effectiveness overall.
I love that so much. Raul, David, are you doing any of that cultural training? I know we have a lot of questions, but I'm just fascinated by this. I love it.
Okay. Yes, we do that, and it's funny, Ken, that you were mentioning hyperinflation because that is a reality of our markets, absolutely, and the cultural training has some of that. And as you said, it touches everything because from the way you give a business card in China or in Asia, to the way that you express your emotions in Latin America, or the way that, gender relates to the other gender in some countries in the Middle East, right? Those are things that we need to better understand. And I say we as in HR, you could say we as in the business, but I think it's absolutely critical that we HR are aware and are intentional about managing those differences in a way that's productive for us and that enables the leadership of the business to be more productive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I work for an Israeli company at the moment. We're listed in the U.S., but it's an Israeli headquartered company. And I'd never worked for an Israeli headquartered company, and not much interaction with my Israeli colleagues in my previous firms. I've actually worked mostly for American headquartered companies when I was based in Asia. So my experience, being an American in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, in Shanghai, in Singapore, and receiving corporate comms, corporate messages, the way of operating, down into a local market where we're operating. It was very fascinating to me, and noticing a lot of the nuance that gets missed, or some of the head scratchers that would come through when some messages or programs are being rolled out. And so this cultural training, I was exposed to it many years ago as we were rolling things out in Asia. And we are doing the same thing at our company at the moment, because if you think about our population, we have folks in Japan, we have folks in Singapore, Israel, we have folks in London, and in the US, and just pure communication wise, the cultural differences like we're alluding to here, it's really important, especially the virtual world that we operate in, that people are aware, and they can take note at some of the cultural differences. We even build it into our onboarding, because we have so many colleagues that are headquartered in Israel, and some of those cultural ways of communicating can be just vastly different from some of those other locations and cultures.
I love this subject. I mean, we literally just on this subject could probably spend 2 hours, and I think it also enriches people's experience, employees' experiences, and expands their knowledge in many different areas, kind of expands their their brain, from really getting outside of what they know and learning about, other people. So I love that so much. I think it's so important. Okay, we'll go on to the second question. What technologies and tools are you currently leveraging to ensure that mission, vision, policy, and culture can be adequately disseminated and reinforced? What are the obvious and more underappreciated barriers to achieving the level of integration? Another really heavy one. All right, well, Ken, I'm going to have you start with this one.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I think at a high level, starting with HR processes, tools, et cetera, where viable and whenever possible, have global visibility and enablement and empowerment tools through a global HRIS, LMS, ATS, and in the other acronym systems that we build and implement. That includes communication and collaboration platforms. What I mean by that is leveraging all of those with true global visibility. A lot of companies grow by acquisition. Companies, including ours, have grown through acquisition. Whenever viable, try to integrate as quickly as possible so that you are using one source of truth globally. Now, having said that, and that goes for a lot of times, it's those communication and collaboration platforms, and I'm thinking about Slack, Teams, Google Meet, Google Chat, whatever that is, that are the active cascading of messages and things like that are the active sharing of information. Those are oftentimes where the values are really visible and alive, I would call it, even more so than what we think of as our HR system of record, where we oftentimes try to push information. It's the other channels that are the daily lived channels. And we talk about that all the time. Culture is not what is written, but what is lived and acted on. And I think that holds true for every organization. So the more you can enable that and have those as global systems, in my opinion, the better. There are some which are still developing, and these are often the AI-enabled systems, whether that is around learning, whether it's about components of HR, it is about tapping into sentiment analysis, real-time sentiment analysis. These are tools that can be delivered locally, but also having global visibility to those insights. It can track whether we use the term employee engagement or we go to another term, but it allows us to tailor interventions proactively. We also are using AI for predictive analysis of potential levers within the organization, looking at that real-time sentiment analysis, triangulating that with performance and engagement scores, things like that, and looking to engage in more state interviews as a result of some of those that triangulation. You had asked also about barriers, though, and I think the biggest one may sound obvious, but for too long, we in our profession, the HR profession, have looked for a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think especially with AI, we are seeing that I'll call it the word of the day, it is not generative AI, agentic AI, or anything else. It is personalization. And the more that we can build in personalization into our learning, engagement, management of talent, and overall management of the organization, I think we are much better served. I think the other piece is organizations need to define where they are and where they want to be on their AI journey. That will reinforce their mission and culture very much. Do they want to be an AI first organization? There's a lot of talk about AI, but most haven't even made that determination, because that will drive a lot of the decisions. Also knowing that many of the employees have a lot of technology fatigue already. So there have to be thoughtful implementations if you are going down that reskilling, upskilling route of AI, of how to do that. Those would be a few of the areas that we've invested in heavily. We are one of those AI first organizations. We have a daily AI blog that goes out across the organization, facilitated by HR. We have monthly HR training, AI trainings led by our HR team in conjunction with other partners from the organization. So these are a few things that we've done in this space, all of which are reinforcing our vision, our mission, and our AI first culture.
Wow. I know, I mean, it was inevitable that AI was going to come into the conversation. I mean, that's just, I mean, the truth is that, especially, HR leaders, we have to be experts in this. And I love that HR is leading the trainings, because I really do think that we have a lot of large ownership in this, because it is the employee experience at the end of the day. And it's really exciting learning about how to leverage it, but we really all need to get on board. I think it's moving fast, the train's moving fast. And, one thing that I really liked is the sentiment analysis, because the capability to be able to aggregate and pull together that internal information to start understanding the common language, and like you said, what culture actually is, to be able to assess and make really good decisions based on that information. So, and then it's limitless, and we're still learning, but definitely something that is really exciting. And I would love to hear, anybody else's. David, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, not as sexy as Ken's, kind of AI tools. So we play with AI too, and we're doing hackathons with AI in our company, and we're trying to integrate it and opening accounts for people. But I wouldn't say it's like really embedded in our culture yet. We're sort of we're getting there. So I don't actually have a strong technology example to share, but I think for us, again, going back to my earlier comment about being a satellite office in New York here, and being headquartered out of Israel, we organize our company more by business lines than we do geo. We don't really have sort of geo leadership or geo site leaders. So we did implement something to try and help with that, because we did find that, especially with the smaller offices being scattered across the world, and the biggest in Tel Aviv, the culture it just wasn't translating, the values weren't translating, et cetera. So we did build out a framework where we have a business site leader and an HR site leader sitting side by side, and kind of focusing on 4 core areas. One is just communications, and communications being anything that comes from corporate. We're not going to stop anything that comes up from corporate, but if there's follow-up required, if there's translation required afterwards, town halls, whatever it might be, to kind of be aware of that. And of course, if there's change management happening, and we have an opportunity to tailor messages for our particular site, we try to jump in and do that. The second area is just around policy practices, making sure that we're not blindly just implementing global policy, global practice, global benefits, which I think might get into some other topics. But that's really important, that the site has a voice, and that we can step in and make sure that we can provide feedback and steer wherever we need to. We also have the EVP, the local EVP. What does it mean to work for this company in New York, in London? So that's really important for us. And then lastly, I think, is just driving that sense of community, because we have a sense of what is it to be a similar Weber, how we call ourselves, but what does it mean to be a similar Weber in New York or Boston or London or Tokyo? And so that's really the framework that we're leaning on heavily, to try and drive our culture throughout the sites, and having this local kind of feeling with that site management.
So do you have EVPs for each region then, or a different?
Yeah, we built
Okay.
out sort of
Love that.
we built out like an EV plan for each site, driving initiatives to the market, how we tie with talent acquisition, et cetera.
All right, I will move on. Okay, what are the core barriers, pitfalls, and/or unappreciated challenges that prevent the construction of global benefit plans? Ooh, this is a juicy one. That are both centrally managed and locally viable. What solutions, successful or otherwise, have you implemented in response? I can't wait for this conversation because it's been a journey for me, I'll tell you that. Ken, we'll kick it off with you.
So this one has taken up quite a bit of discussion within our organization, and yet we've taken the approach that we aren't moving towards globalization of our business plans and are sticking with whether it's not localized but national or regional benefit plans. And that's because of the barriers that you were asking about. There are vast differences, as I think most of us know, in statutory requirements, healthcare systems, cost structures, and even employee expectations. So when I say that, I'm thinking of employee benefits such as medical, dental, vision, those type of standard plans, retirement plans, things like that. All of those are regionalized or even national. Here in the US, we have one common benefits plan for all of the organizations that we've brought under the EMED umbrella. But that's very different than in the UK, for example, where we have there are different employee expectations, but the statutory requirements are very, very different. So I think the pitfalls are then, in my mind, assuming that global equity would mean identical benefits. I think that leads to a lot of dissatisfaction, especially when local needs then aren't taken into account. And so as a solution to that, we've implemented a global philosophy with around how we treat one another with a level of respect, fairness, and other items. But it doesn't mean that applies equally to the benefits delivered. Those are delivered with local execution. So we have certain guardrails or minimum standards, I'd call it, but all of the flexibility happens with regional customization in our organization. And and I think this is important, we always keep very open feedback loops open, so that we're able to address those in as close to real time as possible as new opportunities for enhancing those plans develop on a national or regional level.
Yeah, I love that. No, I think feedback loops are absolutely essential. I mean, it's been such a pleasure for me. Our UK team loves Bupa. They're so happy with Bupa. For so long, we've been, trying to find. So getting that feedback, and it's not always, we want all the feedback, but again, that's a really good one because when we're going through renewal, we're like, yeah, we're gonna move forward. So yeah, I think it's so important to listen to the business and what their needs are, and are they being met? Raul, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I want to reinforce something Ken was saying, which is this idea that we got to be, how do I say, humble enough to recognize that the expectations are different across countries. And Ken, you said it very well, so I'm not going to repeat that. And it's obvious, right? I was, getting to know the business a few years back, surprised when the expectation of an employee of a certain level in Brazil is that you get an Armor card. Now, that is not even an expectation that you get a car in the US, and it becomes an expectation that you get a normal car in Italy, right? So, Ken, to your point, absolutely. I want to add one more point, which as an HR business partner, as I call myself, born and bred, it's important because so far, the feedback that I've heard from my compensation and benefits global partners was, if we adapt too much to a country level requirement, our system will not be able to to cope with it. And linking back to the question before and the what Dave and Ken said before, we're at that point where with AI and the new powerful computers we have and systems, that's not anymore true. So the challenge for us in HR, for me, becomes how do we apply the right technology to make sure that we are adaptable to the point that Ken was saying of how do we adapt to the new trend of the market? And that might be health, and it might be well-being, and it might be time off. I don't know, right? But I think we're at that point where we cannot excuse ourselves from being absolutely responsive in every market.
It's a hard one for me. I'll try to see if we can edit this out potentially. But I mean, I don't have tons of experience with this, but I think it's just such a complex thing to get right. You're at the crossroads of, your global consistency. What does that mean? And you've got your local statutory requirements. You have your local expectations of that market. You have the talent situation in a particular market that needs to be taken into account, and it's simply impossible to have sort of equal. What does that even mean? Like equal benefits. So you've got a crossroads of 5 or 6 different things that are coming together. And I think you just need a playbook for each market and weighing and scaling, where do we play in this market? You've got your guardrails. I think, Ken, you were kind of explaining it this way. But you have to look at each market probably slightly differently given some of the talent challenges in a particular market as well. So it sounds really hard.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a strategy that comes along with understanding the market and your benchmarking where you are against your competitors. But there are also a lot of different variances or nuances that come along with, certain countries. It's very hard to recruit the right people. So, do we need to up the ante versus yes? I mean, it's really a localized effort. Because you're not going to bring equity into. I mean, every country is completely different. So it is something that I do think that you think locally, but try to align as much as you can. For instance, we brought in a global EAP program. It's actually been much better than any US EAP that I've seen. It offers so much more. It's pretty robust. Another thing is just right now with our organization, and I think most organizations, that burnout or that wellness, that work-life blend is so imperative. And so, what can we do to bring in the right resources, the ones that are actually going to make an impact, I'm not going to, things that really are going to make a difference in somebody's lives and improve their health. So, making a focus in there, those type of things I think can be aligned right across the world. But then when we're talking about like individual benefit plans, and I love this. We're gonna have to do this like on a monthly basis now, just connect offline, because you learn so much from your global partner, global peers, if you will. Super. I'm gonna head on to a really good subject, and it's had a lot of highlights in general lately, but DEI, well, especially in America and the American context, is incredibly well defined. I wouldn't say well comparatively. I think everyone defines it differently, frankly, but it can vary dramatically across different regions and countries. So what best practices and lessons can you provide with respect to building that DEI strategy that conforms to the organizational mission while accounting for the tremendous differences between the locales? So how much standardization is possible if desirable in this context? I really like this question, and we can go deep here, but Ken, again, I'm going to kick it off to you to start.
All right. Well, hopefully I can get some good discussion started here. Here too, I think we've acknowledged that it's a different form of discussion right now, especially here in the US, with how much it's in the news, how much energy there is around this topic of DEI, but we've anchored it around the concepts of universal, I'll call it human dignity. And what I mean by that are concepts such as fairness, respect, belonging. And while you're right, DEI is very well defined here. We tie those human dignity aspects to our organizational values, and we start from those shared principles. So we elevate the DEI discussion to elements that have common global embracing, much more so than the more nuanced elements that can oftentimes be very regionally or even nationally focused. So we see some countries, when we talk DEI, they immediately go to thoughts of gender equality. We see others where it is ethnicity focused. And I think by elevating that and creating a global DEI discussion around more of those globally accepted norms, it's allowed us to still foster DEI, be engaged with our partners in the region while having a common language that we can talk about, while certain terms are, I won't call them taboo, even though certainly in news media they may be here in the US. But certainly that we still have a common communication language while talking about DEI and aspects of that. So we aim for a unified vision. I'm happy to go into that a little more if you like, but we really look at regionally tailored action plans, but that are now what we call elevated to those universal principles that all of us can get behind, and that we're always at the core of DEI initiatives.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're similar in the respect of, what I have found, no matter what country, we're in, everyone defines what this means differently. And so when that happens, it's really hard to bring everybody in, and the whole purpose is to have everyone aligned with what your purpose and visions, right, and your culture is, right? So how do you do that? How do you bring everybody in to be aligned to what that, how we move forward and bring that into our purpose? And so for us, we created something called Involve, which it's outside of DEI. It brings in all that we're doing the work. It's just the word, right? So we have 3 pillars. CSR, how are we giving back to our communities? The affinity groups, which I think are extremely important as you're bringing in the global aspect and creating groups. I'm interested in that, right? Japanese cooking, let me. And then talent and recruiting. How are we bringing in the most, culture ads, right? And diverse thought groups that we can. So focusing on those things and how we can really build those out and bring everybody in to that has been really effective on how we kind of, manage the word, right? But we're doing the work. It's not talking the talk, it's walking the walk, So that's kind of how we're aligning it globally. Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something you just said, Finesse, which is doing the work while you're doing DEI, right? I mean, I think that's critical. The way we do it, which is somehow similar to what you were saying, is we have 8 PBRGs, People Business Resource Groups, and it's important that it's People Business Resource Groups because what they focus on is on doing the day-to-day work in a way that supports the building of community A, B, and C, whatever it's a gender-based community or an ethnicity-based or so on and so forth. And then because we have, arguably, we're a big organization and we have 8 of those, every country and every region chooses the one that's more important or the ones that are more important, right? But again, always with a focus on how does this build the business while we create the right communities that support each other, right? And just one example that for me has been absolutely, emotional, if you want, because it links with something that's important for me. One of the things we do, for instance, in some countries in Europe and outside of the US is we have groups of women and men, but fundamentally led by women. So what we call Be Now, who support each other in their progression and development, and have decided that they want to support other women with less fortunate backgrounds. But again, focusing on women who have a need to develop, and ideally close to the health business, because that's the one we are in. And so by putting those things together, the CSR, the day-to-day work, and the support group, what we achieve, and I'm sure you sympathize with that, is a total sort of synergy of everything comes together at once. And so people are self-engaging, I guess is what I can say.
I really, really like that. It also really brings everyone together to share the same value system. You know, you're all, yeah, that's, I really, really like that. Thank you for sharing. All right, we have one last question, and I think we can squeeze it in. How does your organization define business priorities for each country? You operate within and construct plans accordingly without losing sight of your enterprise values. Have you experienced any pushback from employees in one region or country over perceived lack of resource commitment relative to other locations? Raul, I'm gonna have you start with this one.
I'm sort of half laughing when I read this question, Finesse, and it's fundamentally because I keep saying to people that I work and talk with that I come from a country that the sort of the headline of the country for tourism is Spain is different, right? And I'm laughing because every country I go, people tell me we're different, right? And it's true. It's always true. Every country is different. US versus Spain versus Brazil versus China, right? And yet we're all bounded by one purpose, which in our case is to serve more patients and grow the biopharma business we're in. And so every country has their own particular strategies to achieve their goals. And every country, and every individual in one country, and every GM in the country, and every HR people in the country are complaining or saying that we don't have enough resources. There's never enough resources, right? So I think that's an element of absolute truth, that there's never enough people to the work that we need to do, because the work we need to do is never ending. And at the same time, I think there's always I don't know if it's a myth or a game or both, but it's part of the game that we're playing, right? We never have enough resources, and this links to the priorities, because for me there's an important part of organizations of the future, and this is, I think we're very used to say we got to do less with more, or more with less, sorry. And I keep trying to go against that tide, because for me the critical part and the way we can really achieve our business objectives through the organization is to do less than we're doing today. We just need to do more focused, choiceful projects and stuff, and do it really, really well. And that will return the money that we need to, and that will return the engagement that we need to. And last but not least, and I know this is a sort of a tangential, but it's important also for me. I love to work with interesting people, and interesting people don't grow out of 16-hour workdays. We grow interesting because we have different interests, and we can innovate within the combination of those interests and work, right? And I keep saying, if we're not allowing ourselves to have a life other than the work life, then the risk is not only on us, but also on the business, because innovation gets hurt. And so I think that's important as we define the organizational strategy that serves the business strategy. That needs to be a critical part, because then achieving sustainable business results becomes very difficult if we don't do that.
I can't agree more, and I'll tell you, I think there's a correlation between working less, but smarter, and I'm going to talk about that a little more, and having more time, right, and balance. And I completely agree with you. What I see, not here, but in general, I think well, most of us, most humans, it's really easy to forget like what our end goal is. And, it's really important to consistently, as a leadership, team, to say, what are we trying to accomplish here? What is going to impact the business and move it forward? Because I think a lot can be shredded off if you really define those well and just focus on, that, then you could become more lean, right? And I think a lot of things that we do, and not just HR, but just in general, but, really focusing in, and being more intentional on those goals and what you're trying to, because we get lost in the every day it's and step back and go, what are we, I try to do that on a consistent basis. Is this serving the purpose? What are the top 3 KPIs that we're trying to, accomplish in the next 3 years? Is this serving that purpose? If it's not, it's a waste of everybody's time.
And
So
just one thing to add to what you were saying, Finesse, because I think we're building on each other here. We've even created the Let It Go initiative outside of the US, which probably has some copyright issues that we don't want to address here. But it was intention precisely to what you were saying, to say, hey, what are we focusing on and what are we not doing, and let it go. And it's not easy, but it has to pick up.
Yeah, and building that into the culture, right? Part of just how you think through things on a daily basis. So golden. I do think that we can produce more with a focus, and people have less time, more time rather, to be with themselves and their family, that blend. Okay, well, that was the last question. This has been lovely, and I mean it. Like, we should do like this quarterly call or something, because I definitely am feeling this energy. This has been a lot of fun. Is there anything that anybody wants to end with? No. Okay. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm grateful that we did this today.